What's going on, guys? We found another playable character. You'll never believe it. It's another athlete. And man, I feel like I'm saying this over and over again, though, but athletes in the Bitcoin space are some of the deepest thinkers that I know. It's kind of a common theme going on. So, another playable character, Sir Ulric. I met him almost a year ago, right around the time I met Dante. I believe it was at Pacific Bitcoin. And he's one of the smartest people I know, talking about faith, education, which we're going to get into more. Talked about a fair amount this episode. We're going to get into even more in deep dives, just specifically about that. We talk a lot about his upbringing and how he was raised, how he was formed, the articles he's written for Bitcoin Magazine and for many other publications, and his career as a basketball player, and recapping the NBA Finals a little bit. And the way he thinks about sports and the NBA is actually fascinating as well. And you can take some learning from that as well. I think that's one of the coolest things about talking to people like this is they're such deep thinkers. Everything they do and spend time on, they're thinking about and how you can learn and grow from it. So just the way he talks about the NBA Finals and the way he breaks down players, you can learn about homework, doing your homework, trust but verifying, and learning certain aspects. And we can take that from everyone. It's kind of like people that are wrong all the time are just as important as people who are right all the time. You can learn something from everyone. So I appreciate Ulric coming on, and please let me know what your thoughts are at the end of this and what you'd like to see us dive more into the future, because we are definitely already talked about diving more into, like I said, faith and education, as he's very passionate about that, and how we can better the children and better the future moving forward. And another interesting thing was just his parents and the leg up he had with his wonderful parents who gave him this ability to see things differently. So we talk about that as well. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. I give to you, Ulric. I hope you enjoy. We'll see you at the end.
All righty, Ulric, thank you, brother, for joining me today. And I just really appreciate you coming on. I know it's early where you are, but that's how we like to rock and roll. So I appreciate you coming on here and giving us your 2 sats today, brother.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for having me. There's nothing better than wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is talk about Bitcoin. So I'm happy to be here.
The one thing I will say too, and I was going to mention this to you when we were talking before we got going here, but I wanted to say it on here, which is, man, I'm biased being an athlete as well, but some of the athletes, man, between you and Dante and Big Sean and you just going down this list, Harry Gray, there's so many guys that are some of the deepest thinkers I know. And it's funny you were saying, like, I can be so long-winded sometimes, and I can be as well. I've got people yelling at me on here sometimes. Let the people talk. We want so it's just funny. But again, I'm biased. But the athletes, people are like, oh, yeah, he's an athlete, and it's like, yeah, well, you better watch out, because some of the athletes are the most well thought, I would say, people out there. And you're one of those people. That's why we got you on. So again, I appreciate you coming on, dude.
Thank you, bro.
Yep. Cool. So let's start kind of from the beginning. Like I was saying pre-show, we want to kind of go through everyone's story a little bit, and we love the macro and all that kind of stuff. But what was that story? Just kind of going and leading from childhood, your background in money, and like when it was introduced to you, what your thoughts were initially, and kind of how it led you up to current day. And I know it's kind of a long-winded question, but hey, we're here for it. So how did that journey look for you?
No, it's fine. Let's see. So first of all, as a child, and especially in primary school, I was homeschooled, Christian education. I was one of those early technology adopters. My parents had me video schooled for most of elementary school through Abeka education in Pensacola, Florida, even though I was living in Los Angeles. But had a couple years in private school and public school, intermittent throughout elementary. I think kindergarten through preschool through 8th grade. I probably went to school maybe 2 to 3 years. Went to Catholic school in 8th grade, and then public school for the rest of my high school. But my learning was always intermittent with was included always included biblical backed teaching, whether from science perspective, history perspective, and definitely just straight up, Bible class in the middle of your standard academics. So it kind of taught me, it gave me that firm ethical standard that maybe some kids that went to public school didn't necessarily get from their schooling. You would hope they get it from their parents, but again, as we know in our current society, You know, the government has overtaken so much of the parenting and the raising up of children, and this is why we have the arguments and the drama, the politics that we have now is because there's so much fighting for what your children should be taught and where they should be taught. So that was me growing up, at home. Never left the church, still going every Sunday with my mom. My dad, my mom, both conservative libertarian. Didn't really understand my dad's perspective when, you're growing up and you're supposed to idolize presidents and look up to them. Always ask like, Dad, who's your favorite president ever? And he's like, they're all bad. And I'm like, I didn't get that answer. I didn't get that answer.
Oh, that's
He's trying to,
amazing.
yeah, he's trying to tell me like when I was 12 or 13 about, this Kennedy and what he wanted to do with the central banking. And I just didn't get it, that Donald Trump was a lesser of two evils. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, that's fine. So Kennedy and Trump, those were kind of his ideal presidents if he were to choose any of them at all. But
Picking the
then
poison. Yeah.
yeah, and so I never really understood that until
Hey, really quick, I want to annoy the hell out of you with a quick little break to just remind you that we have to share the signal within the noise because the algorithm hate truth. The algorithm hates truth. So we have to do all that we can to spread the signal. The faster we do that, the quicker change comes to the world. We need to be the change we seek to be. What are we doing? What am I doing? What are you doing to build a future? Also, if you want a written version of a lot of what we do here, please go to the description and find the link to our blog, our Substack, as well as you will see many links to either the work or the companies, the places you can find all the playable characters here that we talk to and how you can connect with them. So now back to the show. Thank you.
fast forward more than 25 years, not 25, but maybe, fast forward 20 to 25 to 23 years, he starts talking to me about, what what he thinks Bitcoin may be.
Wow.
He's not a gambler, but he's definitely well read. And so my dad actually orange pilled me at the very
Wow.
least. And he told me, hey, you may want to look at this Bitcoin. I'm like, well, I have some already. I was so proud that I like to always be ahead of the game when someone tells me something. Oh, you should really try this supplement. I'm like, oh, I'm already there, brother, already there. But he told me about Bitcoin, and I was like, oh yeah, I have a little bit. And he said, no, you need to get more. Not like, oh, you should probably buy a little bit more. Oh, you have some good. He said, no, you need to buy more. You need to acquire more. It's going to change everything. Um, and then I was like, well, why is he telling me this? And so when he finally told me to listen to people, or pay attention to the people that he was listening to, primarily, boomer advocates like Max Kaiser, or even macroeconomists like George Gammon, probably
Mhm.
don't
Yep.
fit the classic Bitcoin maximalist or based Bitcoin perspective. But me listening to those people initially caused me to say, okay, Max Kaiser seems to be really big on Bitcoin. Let me go listen to someone else because I don't just want to have this one guy talking in my ear. I want to gain more knowledge, more perspective from others. And I expanded my scope of education on my own past whatever my dad may have been listening to at the time. And that happened to coincide with the eventual shutdowns around society with the COVID pandemic. So I was even though I had a little bit of Bitcoin and crypto in 2017, I really started learning about what Bitcoin meant in 2020. Uh, and so shutdowns and uncertainty in the economy, the money printing, it was in your face. It was never like that before. They've always printed money,
True.
but never at the rate in which in which it happened. We've always had, down times in the economy, never where we actually turned off a switch and the economy shut down. No more supply chain, no more physical, no more in-person services. Everything was digital or minimal kind of
Yep.
engagement from an economy perspective. I don't know the right term, but I use that time to get my field workouts in, weight vest and plyometrics. And I also,
Oh
and while
wow.
I'm doing those things, I was also had my Bluetooth in my ear, and I was consuming hours of Bitcoin education, and that was it. Uh, and I consumed so much that I started saying, this is the kind of thing that I want to apply my time to. This is the answer to playing too many video games or getting worried about you won't be able to play basketball forever.
Hmm.
This was worth my time, and it was worth other people's time too. It's worth other people's time too, in my opinion. And those people may not just know about it yet. So I took it upon myself, you know what? I want to My friends aren't listening when I'm talking to them about it. My closest members of my family aren't necessarily listening to me when I'm talking about it. They're like, yeah, 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 and move on to whatever tickles their fancy at the moment. New movie, gossip in the news. Uh, and I felt like when we should be focusing on things of utmost critical nature, people decided to opt into burying their head in the sand more than they ever have before. The things that were happening on the news, whether it was the 2020 presidential election, whether it was the COVID crisis, the the idea of should vaccines be mandated or not. These are the kind of things that people may have had an opinion on the surface level, but they didn't get into why they had these opinions, or for where their opinions came from. When you talk about sovereign individual sovereignism, the natural laws of man, God-given rights, these kind of things, people had an opportunity to see people had an opportunity to say, you know what, this is happening. The world is changing right before my eyes. Let me fortify my mind with some knowledge, with some learning, with understanding where I come from and why. And I just felt like that wasn't necessarily the case. So I said, you know what? I want to write to my people. I want to write to my friends. I want to write to my family, and not just write a letter and hand it to them. I want to get it validated, get it recognized by people outside of my general circle. The Bible says that, a prophet is not honored in his own home, and I'm not elevating myself to a prophet standard, but in terms of uh, I have a message that I think is very important to you, not just to hear myself talk. And you guys should be, and it's relevant to your lives. You should be paying attention. So I decided to write, um, pub, uh, propose it to Bitcoin Magazine because they were the only platform that was accepting uh, piece essays from people without a journalistic background. They didn't
Yep.
need any highly regardedness. It was very, very, very good of them, at least from my perspective. I know that now looking back, I know that there were more avenues, but they were just the most easy. They had the widest reach, and for someone new
Yes.
like me, I couldn't find Citadel 21. Pleb Underground wasn't around yet, and so this was a good medium for me, and I grew to become one of their more consistent contributors over 12 months. Probably published 10 articles in a 12-month time frame. After that first year, I started diversifying on other platforms, still a little bit on Bitcoin Magazine, but also published on Satoshi's Journal, Swan, um, another one as well. I think I'm slated for a couple on Thank God for Bitcoin whenever they get their platform up, and I'm slated for another one on Pleb Underground and Simply Bitcoin. I started after the conference in 2022. Had an opportunity to meet several people that are passionate and work in the space, and I had a chance to go on podcasts and talk about my perspective. And this wasn't for any personal glory, although it's fun to be recognized. It's fun to, for people to tweet out your name when you wake up in the morning, you least expect it. One time I woke up in the morning, Jimmy Song had retweeted one of my articles and talked about it on one of his spaces. And when he tweeted my name, I was 90% sure is a scam because every morning you wake up to a Greg Foss, a Jimmy Song, scam retweet. But I clicked on
Yep.
it. I'm like, oh, this is getting like 10 likes already. What is that? Oh, wow. That was a real Jimmy Song retweet. And I told my mom and my dad, my brothers, sisters, and they're like, who the heck is Jimmy Song?
Oh, that's
So it's like,
amazing.
so those are, those things feel nice, but the main mission the main vision of my mission is essentially to say, hey, the stories that I'm telling, the perspectives that I'm having, you may not think that they are worth much because that's just Ulrich telling you that. But there are people out there who are very successful, who are highly regarded in their own way, who know a good story when they see it. They're saying, "Hey, your writings are credible, and we won't be ashamed of publishing it. In fact, we are honored to publish it." So my whole strategy is if Swan or Bitcoin Magazine is willing to publish something that I write, maybe it's worth the time that it would take you to read it a little bit, and maybe it'll change your life. And that's where I am right now with a bunch of different little projects, whether it's my own personal website or the Declaration of Monetary Independence, going on collaborating on podcasts or projects that promote Bitcoin education, and it's all for the edification of the people. I'm not looking to change my career to go work in Bitcoin. I have a great career. I have a great job. It's fun, it's engaging, it's technical, it keeps me sharp. But because of Bitcoin, I realize how much time I actually have. Bitcoin saves your time in more ways than one, not just from, oh, the value of your time earned goes up, over time as the Bitcoin's price goes up, number go up, technology. But when you realize how important Bitcoin is, it sort of mutes many things in your life. Not everything. You still have to work out. You still have to go to church. You still
Mhm.
have to devote time to your family. Um, but the extra things, oh, I'm going to watch the the current thing that Netflix throws at you. I'm going to read the latest gossip news, maybe overload on the latest gossip news. Or I can say, I'm going to learn about something that I feel is going to essentially change the world, and I can help others recognize that. So I opt for that one as opposed to what most people call the current thing.
Boy, that's you made me look very smart in saying what I said in the beginning that some of the athletes I know in the Bitcoin space, they're some of the deepest thinkers. That was wow, beautifully said. Really quickly, I want to go back to something you said a little like a little while ago, right in the beginning, which was your dad being beyond his years. Really, and how did he? That's it's not like a super common thing that you're gonna have someone maybe it's Gen X or a Boomer come to Bitcoin first and then show their kids that. That's not a very common story you hear in the Bitcoin world. So your dad being libertarian, I would love for you to dive into that for a minute and just like what was he doing? Like what made him the way he was that was able to, obviously he was able to impart these values and these things into you as well. How did he come about where he had this mindset already, this libertarian mindset and into Bitcoin and kind of looking and always questioning everything, obviously, always questioning everything, trust but verify everything. How did that come about for him?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people there. I was in a space one time, and people said, "What made you what converted you to Bitcoin, or what made you a Bitcoiner?" And I gave the answer, and I thought it was kind of cool. I said that I was already a Bitcoiner, I just didn't know about Bitcoin, and or I didn't know about Bitcoin yet. And the catch is Bitcoin combines all these different facets into one, whether it's trustlessness, anti-censorship, uh, true scarcity, a number of these things, and or actual true free market economics. And so he was always under the mindset that central banking stole from the population, in that it was a slow methodological way to rearrange the wealth in society to the most elite people, the people who have most power, the people who are closest to the money printer, as we all say, the Cantillon effect. Not only that, but the idea that we have a two-party system and that all these politicians either disliked each other or kind of rivals or absolutely despised each other. He basically called BS on it, and most people don't can't accept that because they're too the power of the propaganda of the mainstream media is too much for them, and so it's like we have we continuously regurgitate these images, or we continually consume these images, these messages. And I think he was just one of those guys that said, no, that's not true. Look, I'm going to verify, I'm going to validate what you're telling me. And he did his own research. And that's what we talk about. We all say, do your own research. Don't trust, verify. And he verified, he did his own research, and he called a lot of things out for what they were, which is not as the mainstream media would show them to the population. So I just think that he was essentially always somewhat of a Bitcoiner. He just, that technology wasn't there yet. Cryptography wasn't there yet. The internet wasn't there yet. And I saw a graph at one point with all these technologies that had to be developed for Bitcoin to actually be discovered. And we weren't going to be ready until it happened, until at least the year 2000. So I feel like there are a lot of people out there that may have wished Bitcoin may have come out in the 50s or 60s or even 1900. But I do believe, I mean, it was uh, Ford that said that money should be based on energy, over 100 years ago. And so I just feel like I feel like that type of the characteristics that come from my father or from other people. I mean, Max Kaiser is the same way. Greg Foss has and Lawrence Lepard. These guys have similar dispositions. Uh, they have Bitcoin's not just a cool technology toy. If we treat it like that, then we fall down the path of comparing it to Doge or Ethereum. And it's really a tool for economic freedom. And that's the most important thing of the matter. And so anyone who believes in economic freedom, at the very least, they're essentially a Bitcoiner, and they just have to realize that that technology is there, and that comes from research, that comes from others teaching. Yeah, I think that would complete my answer. I sound like I'm in an interview.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Yeah, I know. That's the athlete in you coming out, right? Like this the interview style. Where do you think you said something earlier too, which I noted just to touch on quick too. Where do you think, in your opinion, because I think that everyone has a different answer for this, but where do you think the government kind of became that parent? So you mentioned something earlier about the government becoming that parent instead of parents and families parenting, which is kind of coming full circle with your father and just kind of your family and your mother and your father, how you were raised. But where do you think that line was crossed in your mind? Whether it was, I don't know, the Fed in 1913 or different acts that came out, right? Executive Order 6102, or maybe it was something else, maybe not as discreet. But where in your mind do you think that Rubicon was kind of crossed with the government all of a sudden just like becoming this parent and this overarching overlord, taking care of cradle to grave for people?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple places that you can draw that line. For one, you could say central banking, 1913, where we kind of created an institution that would um, overrule hard money law, if you will, or hard money sovereignty. And then you have 1971, where we left the gold standard, which enabled not us, but leadership, but elites to essentially write a blank check to whatever efforts that they deem appropriate. But then you have another act, and I forget the name of the act, but it was the one where that really caused welfare to explode. And it's incentivized mothers um to stay single as opposed to being married. So they were able to basically gain free economic support from the federal government. And as this blew up, there's a crazy it became a crazy tax burden on the rest of the population. I think that as the government realized its potential power from monetary creation, it's almost like a superhero discovering, that it could, imagine what
Yeah.
Superman felt like when he discovered he could fly. Imagine, we see it in the movies where Spider-Man realizes that he can spit webs out of his wrist, and
Yeah.
what does he do? He screams out, Tobey Maguire screams out, "Woohoo!" And so imagine now you have unbounded control over the money. The government's looking at their hands like, I can do this, and everyone else all of a sudden becomes almost like an NPC, like a character that can be killed or looked over in a video game, and you would think nothing of them. That's what happens when there is unbounded strength in an entity to work out their will with no checks and balances. And we could say that there are checks and balances, the divisions of government or other economies. Well, there's only one economy, and this one economy is under the dollar system. And over time, if anyone were to try to uh, push themselves out of that dollar economy, there may be a war, there may be a bombing, there may be some sort of physical coercion to impact that goal. If you have what you have now with the war, with the proxy war that's going on, we have a lot of money that is going to propagate a war that essentially, the other side, they're saying we don't want to be under the dollar system anymore, because this is what happens when you step out of line of what the ultimate currency would have you do. They'll say, well, we'll stop you from being able to participate in the economy if you protest, mandates that the government tells you, uh like the Canadian truckers, you may not be able to access your bank account. Um, there's all different types of things that a centralized government in control of a centralized monetary network can do to you. And the funny thing is, we're not even on a central bank digital currency standard yet. So that's just with digital money. Now imagine that it's digital programmable money. As technology grows, we're sort of in this parallel race where we are gaining our freedom of monetary independence and information independence with the internet and Bitcoin, but we're also gaining the powers that be are also gaining their ability to coerce through programming, through machine learning, artificial intelligence can be used for good or evil, and we're seeing that kind of thing right now. If if a CBDC were to be launched in in our nation, or a nation that alleged to be free, it's game over for those people. And Bitcoin is that exit. And I don't think we're treating it, I don't think the general public is treating it like that. I think the general public is treating it like a cool trade or a digital collectible. And we're here to share that education that that's not the case, that this is actually your one-way ticket to escape that system that a government would like you to stay under.
Yeah, beautiful answer. I often find myself, I think just yesterday I was telling my wife or asking my wife, like, how do people not see this? And this is something that, you mentioned you've been studying for years. I myself been studying it for years. So, obviously time will tell, right? But to me, I'm fascinated with what's that like, where does that Rubicon cross for the average person? Like, what does it take for them to like learn and see like lockdowns weren't enough? People injecting things into you and telling you what, like that wasn't enough. Like, well, at what point do people kind of cross that? So in saying all this and what in your answer, and then kind of what I'm saying here too, what do you think are the most important things for young people, quite honestly, to build that foundation? Like, say they don't have, and my father was fairly similar to your father in questioning media and for decades, and that's how I grew up too. So it's like we had these, head starts in a way, right, where not everyone has that. And so what are, in your eyes, what are some of the things on your mind, or maybe things you've written about that are, hey, what are some first principles, is nature's law? What are some things to increase someone's financial intelligence, or just kind of their freedom intelligence as a younger person? It may be the most important thing to learn about, money. And what does that look like for you if you're like, hey, I've got my 3 kids, my 4 kids, whatever it is, and I'm growing them. And what is it that Ulric's doing or thinking or imparting on someone else to say, hey, this is what I would do, or this is what I'm doing with my children to give them this head start?
Yeah, I think what it's boiled down to is over the 100 years, the central banks, started in 1913. Also, there is this thing that came out at the end of the 18th century called the Committee of Ten. The Committee of Ten essentially established our academic infrastructure or process that we have today. When it comes down to, you go to elementary school from kindergarten to 12th grade. You have a four-year high school, four-year college, master's, doctorate. That whole structure strategy was came up about 1890s. And I do believe that the education system, whether by design or accident, is holding people back from true free thought. I do believe that academics going to the current established schools, even the private schools, they all follow the same pattern. Most private schools, you don't say, oh wow, like they go to they don't call it kindergarten, they call it something else, and then it's all the same names. It's all 12th grade to high school. Um,
True.
and so I feel like the structure is designed to keep people in this state of mediocrity from a knowledge standpoint. Notice that we talk about central banks, and we learn about the monetary theory, Keynesians and Austrians. When's the first time you heard of that? I tell you, we live in a Keynesian world. I never heard of the word Keynesian until 4 years ago. When's the first time you heard of fiat currency? Um, when I got into Bitcoin. Like, wait, fiat, like the car? Like, what is fiat? Like, we don't have, but those philosophies, they've been around forever. But for some reason, they're just, tw 20 years of learning. You don't need to learn that. Let's just sweep that under the rug. Why? Well, those types of things will cause you to question everything. History. We all learned that Abraham Lincoln, he loved the slaves and loved black people and wanted to free. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I realized, oh wait, that was just an economic coercion decision. That was basically economic terrorism on the South so they can strategically win the war. It's a good plan. Why didn't I learn that as a fourth grader? You know, because somehow the idea is that we should keep our children in the dark so they don't question the ethics, the morals of the people who won history. So it's like history is written. Isn't it funny that no matter what, all throughout history, it seems like the good guys always won. And I'm not trying to make us question, our local leaders or your maybe even your favorite governor or congressman. What I am trying to do is say there is a history out there that is not told, and you can't find it unless you go digging. And so if you have to go dig to find it, could it be that maybe it's been hidden purposefully? Our current education system is essentially hiding things in a purposeful way. Even now to this day, when we talk about, religious freedoms or freedom of thought when it comes to science, um, when in the 1800s, science taught that God created the heavens and the earth. And not to say that that we all have to learn that God created the heavens and the earth, but it seems like nowadays there's no room for argument for the Darwinian theory that we emerged from single-celled organisms. And somehow we went from that to complex beings that we look like here and now. That takes as much faith as a big thing in the sky creating us in 7 days, in my opinion.
Yep.
So
Yep.
why does it seem to be that that is the conclusive truth, at least for kindergarten and 12th graders? So these are the types of things that education leaves no room for discussion, leaves no room for I guess conflicting theories. It says this is the way you need to learn. You need to shut up and take your pill. That's a toxic world. So, long-winded answer to what would I do? I think an education system needs to be overhauled, if not completely abolished. And, I wrote an article about the things that we could use for education. It's called Bitcoin What If the Education System Was Orange Pilled? But it goes through all different types of things that we can do, like using decentralized tools to supplement what your child is learning, which means that people need to take it upon themselves to create their own forms of curriculum that teach history one another way, that teach science another way, and to ensure that it is protected through decentralized mechanisms that what I called in the article was another thing, but it seems like it's manifesting in what is Nostr right now. Right now, we're not being so coerced that we couldn't put things on YouTube, at least not or Rumble. But we live in a world where distance learning is a part of our world. We don't need to sit in a classroom and have a teacher, lecture at us face to face. And we can learn and we can just learn in different ways in that way that was presented to us 120 years ago. I think with artificial intelligence, I think with machine learning, I think what you'll end up having is the questions that would come up for a child, um, learning his arithmetic would be easily addressed through those mechanisms. And how complex could a 10-year-old's question be about multiplication that an automatic system wouldn't be able to approach? And so then that's not to say that a real person wouldn't be in the loop still, but it would decrease the burden on that teacher, on that educator. So I think with technology, we see all these things that improve, whether it's an iPhone, computer, a television, but we're not using technology to improve the things that the government operates on. We're not using the technology to improve our money, which could be Bitcoin. We're not using technology to improve education, which could enable us to learn things quicker and implement topics more quickly. Notice that in our current education system, why does it take us so long to learn about new things like I'm using a weird word, but blockchain? Why why does it take so long for that to be implemented in a modern day curriculum? Why aren't children learning about Bitcoin? Hey, there's this new technology called Bitcoin. Here's what it is. Why do they have to wait until they get grown and say, okay, you can learn that on their own? Well, the current system is so archaic that they can't implement new technologies fast enough to keep up with how fast our society is moving. So obviously, if something's too old for your everyday life, you should look for a new model, whether it's a computer, whether it's a refrigerator, and you should look to supplement your child's education with other forms and other factors other than the traditional traditional education system, because it's essentially holding your child back.
Boy, you took the thoughts right out of my mind. That's brilliantly said, and I think that again, it kind of encapsulates a lot of what we have been talking about, which is the role of the family, your father or your mother playing in a child's education, and government has taken that role over completely, and starting to remove that and go back to what made us who we are. So I think that's just brilliantly said. Reshaping education. I love that article. I've read multiple articles you have, which I will share these in the description. So if anyone wants to check Ulric's articles out as well, have those in there. And you sent me the one which I have not read about orange pilling the education system. So I think that what I find is funny, and I guess it's nature, and this is how life cycles go, and it takes time to change things as a society. But you're going to look back 100 years from now, in my belief, and people are just going to laugh at the way we educate ourselves for a long time, and maybe not in the 20th century so much, but like past the 20th century, where you have technology, you have the ability to learn from the smartest people on earth at any second of the day, where it's like you learn from Mrs. Smith down the road, like, and she was your teacher. That was going to, how would she know? How would someone in your town, and these people just, you're
Right.
limited to your town, going to know everything, So now,
Right.
you're spot on. Like it's going to be this learning, whether it's AI, but just learning from people all around the world at a moment's notice. And that's going to change so much.
Let me interject real quick, because it's funny. Most people think I'm attacking the traditional education system with this piece right here, including many of my family members, friends. It's like, oh, you just hate schools because it was a bad experience for you. I tell you, more people have come up to me about this article and said that I have a teaching background and I think that this is great. I mean, I had one part in this article where it talked about teachers would actually not have to beg the government to pay them more money. It would actually be a more free market approach for how teachers get compensated. I'm not going to go into the details,
Yep.
but teachers actually like this piece. So it's funny, if you, a regular person, are so appalled by this, but teachers are very intrigued and encouraged by it. Where's the disconnect? Where does your heart lie? Does your heart lie, don't take away from what the government has, don't, because that's not fair to my worldview of society? Anyone that would err on the side of the government should own XYZ is by definition a status. If you can't look for ways to unburden the government of all of these services, then you are essentially looking for the government to run your life. We should be, as free market individuals, as Americans, looking for ways to privatize as much as possible. We're much more efficient when we have the incentive of capitalism, when we have the incentive of profit, not when we pass things off to let the government do things for us.
We could talk about this all day, and then maybe
Yes.
it's a subject for a different time, and doing another pod down the road here about just education in general, because this
Yeah.
is it's the topic that comes up more and more as time goes on here. And you even have, I remember even 5 years ago, someone, like, my son's going to U of M law school. And, it was just like a chamber of commerce event. And people then had even like, why is he even doing this? Why is he getting into all this debt? And he was becoming
Mm,
an attorney, was going to U of M, University of Michigan. I mean, which is most, 30 years ago, that would have been like, oh, wow, the whole world would have got down, like bowed to the guy. And now people are questioning this. And this was years ago. So
yeah.
this is going to change big time. In transitioning this a little bit, what we've talked about faith a little bit, stuff like that. What role does faith play for you? Because I've had this battle too, so you can touch on this, which is it's I think I know what it is. In mine is, I think it's faith, and then the money goes, and I feel like that's happened a lot throughout history. But some people are like, well, the money breaks and then things go and society goes, or is it God? People leave and God, and then the money goes and then society goes. What role does faith play in your life, and has it played for you? And also, again, what do you think kind of comes first in this order? Do people leave God or our higher being, and they lose humility, and then the money goes and then society breaks, or is it backwards, or how do you kind of look at all that?
I do think that I have an article sitting around waiting for a platform to take it, and essentially it's called that. I'm calling us out fiat as essentially our current Tower of Babel. And when you think about it, I I talked about, now the government has this power. I can do what? And they essentially find out how great they can be. The government, the central bankers, they are great. They are men of renown, as the Bible described Nimrod in Genesis. Um, and they're men of renown because of the forces that they can apply onto the world around them. And so that type of power corrupts. It's hard to when you show a man, there's an old saying, I always forget it though. It's like we're no bigger than our incentives. And if we are incentivized to create something that out of thin air that empowers us more, we're going to pursue that. Bitcoin essentially cuts that power off. And so when you think about faith and how that affects you, well, you realize that no man is greater than his creator. And when we try to mimic our creator in the wrong ways, what ends up happening is we become sin-filled, like Lucifer. Lucifer wanted to be as great as
Yeah.
God, and he fell because of that and took a third of the angels with him. So I do believe that our fiat system essentially enables us to or it leads us down the path of destruction. And I think that it coincides with the humanism movement, the psychology movement. Once the central banks kind of got into the picture, we became much less of a God-fearing nation. And it's been the 20th century was just a complete backslide in that nature. And it coincided. And I think whether one comes first, I'm not sure which one, but I wouldn't be an argument saying you can't really say the money goes first because we are born into sin. And so I think when we fully accept our sin, and when I say accept our sin, which means we're no longer repentant of it, then we start realizing how great of a sin we can accomplish. So I do believe that, step that walking away from faith, walking away from the respect or at least the reverence of God, even in the 1800s, the 1700s, even Benjamin Franklin wasn't a Christian, but he at least respected Christian ethics. And that goes to say, if you were not a Christian, but you have some sort of fear over some God that tries to be what I believe is the true God, and I'm not trying to disrespect, but whether you have an Islamic faith or if you have an overarching respect for, the ethics that are found in the Ten Commandments, if you walk away from that and say, you know what, that's not that big a deal. Well, then you look for ways that, okay, well, now my authority, my humanist worldview is the authority. you will always look for reasons to justify your actions. And the
Yes.
more powerful you are, the greater consequence of those actions. And it won't just hurt you or your wife or your children, but it can hurt a whole culture, a whole civilization. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And so just by being in the scripture, I find so many points talking about, honest economics, fair, balanced weights. And I've written a couple of articles. I think my first few quoted the Bible basically incessantly. And especially the first one, I mean, which is so crazy. My first article is Christian fear of Bitcoin stems from a lack of knowledge and misdirection. I sent that to Bitcoin Magazine, who's run by CK, Christian Karolis, not a Christian, probably a Jewish guy, whatever. But he was like, I love it. I love that you were able to bring Christian ethics into the Bitcoin space and write about its intersection. We need more of that. And that's what he said. A non-Christian said we need more of that. At least I think. I'm not trying to judge or assume. I just don't
Yep.
don't think he's a Christian. And then I said, okay, I'll do it again. And I wrote about black people, but black people's benefit for a Bitcoin system, but included Bible verses in that. And then the greed of the fiat system, I think talking about real estate, included Bible verses. There's so many. I mean, the Bible writes about, and we always forget this, the Bible writes about money more than any other topic, even salvation. And so when we think about that, well, what is biblical money? Um, most people would say gold. But I would say that gold was a good representation of what was to come. And I do believe that Bitcoin is biblical money. I think that what they're doing to thank God for Bitcoin is on the right path, drawing that intersection more clearly, more definitively. And I like to draw that parallel on my own, on my own time and with my own energy as well.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what TGFB is doing is awesome. That's one of the better Bitcoin books, to be quite honest. I believe. And like you said, there's 100. There's got to be at least 100 biblical quotes in there, and just them kind of writing through that. I know, I believe it was 8 of them kind of put that together. And so just a great one. And the thing I always love thinking, because I agree as well. I think that, I always joke. I always tell the story of there was a little lady, and she would go visit the prison and read scripture to the inmates and things like that, and go hang out with them. And one day one of them came up to her and was like, sister, you know how many rules there are that put me into this place? And she's like, yeah, I know. She's like, did you know there's 10 that'll keep you out? And
Mm.
it was just like, it's such a simple, it's such a simple story, and it just hits everybody, and everyone has the same reaction, where it's like, that's the answer for me always, where I'm like, well, thou shalt not steal. Like, if you just took care of those, then you wouldn't even, I don't know, would you even need money, right? You go down this whole philosophical thing, right, of like,
Yeah.
that, right? But it's, to me, it is the faith, right? It's you get away from that, and then all of a sudden these other things start going, and money seems to be one of those very next things that starts going. So I find it very interesting. And even like Jesus talking about the money. I mean, at that time, like you put it really well, which is Bitcoin or gold was a sign of what was to come, where you had this, where it was almost there. And Jesus even knew, I believe, that was being coin clipped, right? They're clipping things, they're debasing it. So you actually had inflationary money, even though a lot of people call it God's money,
Right.
things like that.
Right.
It was being debased, it was being inflated away. So, and he knew that at that time, and he knew there wasn't this perfect way to transfer your finite time that he has given us into another finite asset. There just wasn't, and there wasn't for up until 2009. So man, it's really interesting. We're gonna have to get into that and more, like go into
Of course.
education and into faith more in future episodes here. What because we'll start wrapping here for the next few minutes. What did you study? So just growing up, whether, it could have been faith, obviously, but what were you studying to kind of bring to where you are now? So it could be faith-based stuff also, but like more just your typical, I don't know, Bitcoin books, sound money, things like that. And
Yeah.
what are you studying now to really sharpen your mind and help you write, obviously, and to speak the way you do? What are those works, those other pieces of work, like I said, could be articles, books, whatever it was, to make you and shape you as who you are today?
I think being in church. I think I mean it's as basic as that sound. I think my pastor, at the church that I go to, I don't need to broadcast it out right now, but I mean, yeah, I go to Branch of Hope in Torrance. So my pastor, Pastor Paul, he's very profound in his delivery. And it's funny, like the way his his sermon, which gives sermon notes, and he tries to stick to it verbatim. Essentially, he is reading off of what he's preaching off of. He may deviate a word or two, or go into a side story, but the way he writes, placing the problem as the crux of the topic, 90%. It parallels the gospel. The gospel taught, Christ said that that he comes for the sick, that he doesn't, that the sick need a doctor. I'm paraphrasing, but the sick are the ones that need a savior. He doesn't come for the people who are well. And of course, the irony is we're all sinners, but the people who
Mhm.
recognize that we're sick, that we need a
Yes.
savior, that's who he's here for. If you're
Yep.
basically saying, I'm good, I'm good. Okay, well, Jesus said, if you're good, then you don't need me. I'll keep going. And so my writing, I like to position the problem as the crux of, as a bulk of the issue. I write very little about Bitcoin is this, Bitcoin is that, but I say, this is the problem, and this is how the problem affects you. And so when
Mhm.
you realize the gravity of the problem, most rational people should say, oh, what do I do? Now, of course, you could just look at the problem and say, I don't care. And then if that's the case, then I just keep on pushing. But essentially, I mirror Pastor Paul, who mirrors the Bible in presenting the problem as the bulk of the message and saying, but Bitcoin, just like the Bible says, essentially, but God. So I think that's a good formula. And I think it keeps me focused as well, because we're not just here to celebrate a cool toy, or be just happy for no reason. And I understand there are people out there that just like to talk about how Bitcoin is so cool, but it's cool for a reason. And it's cool because it essentially saves the economic system, your position in the economic system, from utter despair. And so I keep that focus. But I also, in terms of what else am I reading, I'm an engineer, so I need to read finance. I need to understand why finance is important. So, getting into, I'm an engineer, or I'm a Christian, but I need to understand why ethics are important. So I got into Murray Rothbard. I read Nick Basha's Layered Money. Murray Rothbard's Ethics of Liberty. A lot of these
Nice.
recommendations were from watching the early Breedlove series, and um, they've very much impacted me, especially during the COVID crisis, where I had a lot more time to read.
Yeah.
Um, and so, just like tying those things together, those are the two books off the top of my head. The Price of Tomorrow from Jeff Booth. Got him to sign my book last year. These are the types of things that very intelligent, articulate perspectives that apply to us now, in the past. And I try to loop those concepts into my writings, because there are people out there who haven't read those things, and I can pass that information on in sort of a derivative sort of way.
Great, yeah, great shares. I've read a little bit of Murray Rothbard. I know, like the Tuttle Twins, a lot of their stuff is, I believe, is dedicated to him. I know he was a big
I could
influence on
tell.
those guys. Yeah, yeah. So, just some phenomenal people. Jeff Booth, obviously, for people to go check out and read, and Nick as well, Batia. In transitioning, I know I believe we've been going for almost an hour here. So we'll kind of the last, question or two
Yeah,
here, which I know you can give us.
I'll
This will be a
try
whole
to.
nother pod, right? But NBA Finals recap. Let me know. We got to know how the playoffs, what your thoughts were, and just everything in general, because I think it was pretty interesting. What just everything that kind of happened, but and then what ended up happening last night. Obviously, we're fresh off the Nuggets win. So give us your thoughts on that. And I know in the transitioning is kind of where can people find you? These last couple
Right.
questions. Where can people find you? Your writings, obviously, which we'll link to those. But some of the stuff you're working on with the podcast and the NBA, what happened there. So if you could kind of mix all that together, give us your recap and kind of what you're working on now.
Yes, sir. So first of all, so I do one of my other projects I do is the Bitcoin Ballers with Q, Q like the letter, on Twitter. He's former Bitcoin Magazine podcaster. So me and him decided to write or put together the Bitcoin Ballers, and we're on episode 15 today. this afternoon in about 6 hours, in which we basically talk about big basketball, but from a a less, corporate perspective, a less mainstream perspective, and we get into the things that maybe ESPN doesn't want to talk about, the perspectives that they wouldn't want to talk about. So we will be talking about Game 5, which myself and Q both kind of predicted. I was very adamant. He was a little bit more wavery, so I'll say I was more right than him. He's not here, so he can't defend himself. But the Game 5, when you consider the Heat overachievers, 27th. I'll give you this tidbit, which I thought was the reason for their success in the playoffs. They were 27th ranked in 3-point percentage. In the playoffs, they were number 1. Unless they may have dived, if they didn't dive down during the finals to number 2, which I doubt, they were number 1 in three-pointers made and percentage. When you take a team that wasn't reliant on three-pointers, then you give them that boost of points per shot. That's going to change games. That's going to change results of games. So that's why an 8 seed was able to, despite all these injuries, I don't get it. They're just making the shots that they weren't making during the season.
Yep.
And that's important. And guess what? They ran up against a team that was finally healthy for the first time in 3 years. Every time that this Denver team was in the playoffs, Murray was hurt, Jokic was hurt, Porter was hurt. Actually, Jokic was never hurt, but Porter or Murray, they were always hurt. There's someone else that was hurt. They finally got a combination of veterans, youth, and just efficiency from Jokic every year. And what ends up happening is they win decisively. Miami fought hard, but Jimmy Butler ran out of gas. No discount to him. He had one of the greatest playoff performances of all time, in which I will talk about that. But when you run out of gas and the rest of your team, finally stops playing like the number 1 3-point team in the league, that's what's going to happen. And so I work on that, Bitcoin Ballers. I also have my own website, sirulric.com, that consolidates. I need to update it. It's been 5 months. I need to add some more things, but I like to put pictures from events, my articles, and my podcasts. This will go on that website as well. My resume as well, for my professional career. And just kind of tie in like, hey, this is the work I do in this world. This is me. And then also, working with Mark Mariah and Mike Hobart, we put together the Declaration of Monetary Independence, which is essentially, like it says, it's the Declaration of Independence for money. What's wrong with fiat? What's good about Bitcoin? But frame it in the way that Thomas Jefferson did 300 years ago, 250, 300 years ago.
Yep.
And we have it. It has its own website. It's based off of the Great Barrington Declaration that talks about the issues that many doctors had with how the mainstream media and governments address the COVID pandemic. So we allow you to sign your name as a signatory for the Declaration of Monetary Independence. And one day we hope to have a sort of like a spreadsheet, not a spreadsheet, but like a map and laying out where all the different people believe in the peaceful revolution that is Bitcoin. But it's a great website. We manifest the document physically and at multiple conferences, the Bitcoin conference primarily, but we expect to be at Swan and maybe BitBlock Boom in the future.
Beautiful. Yeah, I can't wait to see that. I did see that recently. So that was, I absolutely love that. It's, boy, very, very cool stuff. I'll link to all these things. And the Bitcoin trading cards, I know you're talking to Aladdin here soon about that as well. And it'd be so cool to have that on there as well and see that in there. So really looking forward to that. Yeah, there you go. We're some sats now. So you'll get you guys in an upcoming series, either series 3 or series 4. That'll be beautiful stuff. Very, very cool. Yeah, it will. It'll be really, really fun to document that. And then really quick, I want to get your thoughts on just Jokic in general and your thought and I know there's like, oh, he's going to be one of the best of all time. I'm not, you know so much more about basketball than I do. Give me your quick thoughts on him because I'm just very curious. Yeah. And I know you guys will probably talk about this later a little bit, but give me your thoughts, the kind of the early scoop on that and just him in general. Because I think a lot of people I just know, and you're like, wow, that guy looks like Frankenstein. Like, what do you mean? Yeah. He's like an amazing basketball player. So give me your down and dirty thoughts on him really quick.
Yeah, there's a very particular thing about Jokic. Jokic. I'm working on another project that probably won't be ready for 6 months, but it is primarily about basketball and establishing a standard for who are the greatest players of all time. I have 3 essays that back up my work, and math, of course, Bitcoin. And I had a standard or results for who were the greatest players of all time last year before this season started, and I have to update it for the end of this season. There are 3 categories. Jokic in the category of normalized normalized performance, which means for every minute you play, how much contribution do you give to your team's success? And I just call it dominance. Michael Jordan is the best. 2 other people, I think Wilt Chamberlain and LeBron are second and third. No, George Mikan and LeBron are second and third. Jokic is fourth.
Wow.
Jokic is fourth. So when you talk about for every minute you've played, what do you contribute to your team's success? Remember that. You didn't play 20 years like Kareem or LeBron. You don't have the best seasons of all time like Michael Jordan. But for the time that you played, you are more impactful than 99.99% of all NBA players ever. And I think, and that especially reigns true in the playoffs. So you'll see that website come out one day in the future, but I think it gives a good case for Jokic just is most efficient when it comes down to everything. When he touches the ball, it's going to be a successful possession, and that's very important. So
incredible.
I would very much weigh on that argument. Don't look for he's still too young to break any career records, but that's not, and he may not break all-time scoring but he will have a lot of in-game records that will just be that will hold with him for a long time. He's very effective and he's used a lot. So usage rate high, efficiency high. That's what Jokic is.
Interesting, man. That is so interesting. Again, I'm sure this talk will continue, obviously, for a number of years, as like you said, as he gets older. I know you got the Jordan Magic picture behind you. Who's your favorite and why all time?
I grew up in LA, so Magic. But if my
Good.
favorite
I'm a
player,
Michigan State boy, so I love it. Great answer.
There you go, Lansing. Yeah,
Yes.
Lansing. Where is his hometown? Is Michigan State in Lansing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and most people would not like my perspective, but based on my analytics, I do think that LeBron, at least as based on the end of the 2022 season, is the best player of all time. Jordan number 2. I have rationale for that. I don't say it lightly, but yeah, most people don't agree with that. I have Magic as the 5th best player of all time.
Interesting. Wow. Well, hey, these are future episodes, things to talk about, and everyone check out, obviously, I got a link to it, the podcast you have going on with Q as well. And then I know you touched on some place where people can find you, Twitter, Noster as well. I
do have Noster, Sir Ulric on Noster. Again, the InPub is insanely long. I think I'll just give it to you.
I'll throw it in there.
And then Twitter is at Kobe Duran, KOBIDURAN, or I go by the moniker Sir SER Ulric, like my website, sirulric.com, and then my Twitter is Sir Ulric as well for a word search.
Beautiful. Any last thoughts? Anything at all to share?
Bitcoin is the answer.
Love it, brother. I appreciate you so much coming on, dude. This is could go for hours, so I appreciate it so much. And I know you've got that thing later, so have fun on that, and we'll do this again.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks all. Take care.
Wow, boy oh boy, Sir Ulric, a true playable character, a true thinker, not just good looks, not just an athletic build, not just an athletic guy. He got brains. You got some brains. So I joked after coming back from Bitcoin Miami that I never said I love you to as many men in my life as I had in a 1 week span. Ulric was one of those guys. Dante, all the people that you've been seeing, and the people that we have coming on in the future here as well, already slated. Just so many people that you connect with right away in the Bitcoin space because of this ethos, this certain ethos and ethics and morality that you share. And you don't agree on everything, and I don't agree with Ulric on everything. And we're going to get into that more as we go forward, but he is one of the smartest people, and I have to take everything he says seriously, and I have to think about it. And that's what the Bitcoin space does to you. That's what people who are in this space currently make you do. True Bitcoiners, sound money, free market, principled people, they make you think. That's the number one thing that we have lost in society, as a bunch of the sea of non-playable characters, people who are unable to think, who are just memorizing, just walking around like a droid, like a robot, unable to think. And that's why we want to find playable characters, the people that make us think, make us reach to our full human potential. Full human potential. Bob Proctor talks about this all the time. We use our 5 senses all the time, but we don't use our 6 higher faculties: will, imagination, reason, memory, intuition, and I don't know, is that 6? I can't remember. Anyway, memory. I'm not using all my 6 higher faculties. Imagination, reason, will, intuition, memory, and reason? I can't remember. I lose my mind here. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you hearing Ulric. Let us know who you would like to see in the future, and what else you would like us to talk about. Ulric and I, we're going to talk about faith and education, but what else would you like us to talk about? I appreciate you being here and watching and being open to playable characters, people that make us think and make us be better. Be better. Appreciate you. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.